I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The message reached Meghan without warning, and its meaning was impossible to soften. Prince William had authorized a permanent end to her final remaining sovereign grant access, closing the last financial and administrative connection she could still claim to the working machinery of the monarchy. What looked like a technical decision carried something far more personal beneath it. One signature had transformed years of royal tension into a boundary that could no longer be negotiated. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Meghan read the confirmation once, then again, refusing to react too quickly. The sovereign grant, the public funding system used to support official royal duties and palace operations tied to them, was never just about money in this conflict. It represented whether any formal thread still connected her to the institution she had left behind. Now that thread was being cut. William had signed a permanent directive removing her final remaining grant-related access and blocking future reinstatement through royal administrative channels. Meghan lowered the page and looked at the advisor across from her. "Did William approve this himself?" she asked. The answer came without hesitation. "Yes." She said nothing. Harry understood the silence immediately, because he knew what his brother's signature meant. This was not another restriction to be reviewed months later. It was a declaration that the old arrangement was finished, and the prince had chosen to make that ending permanent. Harry's anger rose faster than Meghan's. He saw the decision as something deeper than financial housekeeping, because every surviving privilege had carried hope of reconciliation. William, however, had reached the opposite conclusion. Leaving dormant privileges untouched did not preserve peace. In his view, it preserved confusion. The directive made that clear, with one crucial word: permanent. No palace review could restore what had now been removed. William had not reached that point overnight. A documented internal review had examined Sussex-linked privileges for months, tracing which connections still existed, which no longer served an official purpose, and which might create the impression of continued crown approval. By the time Meghan received the notice, the machinery behind the decision had already been moving in silence. That realization changed everything. Meghan could challenge the timing, question the judgment, and demand to know why such language was necessary. Harry could accuse his brother of closing one door too many, but neither could ignore the question hanging over the family. What had happened behind palace doors that convinced William a temporary restriction was no longer enough? The answer reached back into a private conflict that had never truly healed, saved. "I'll prioritize faster delivery for all upcoming sections, and slight word count variation is fine." Behind the financial language were three people carrying very different memories of the same royal rupture. Meghan saw another institution shutting her out. Harry saw his brother making a judgment that reached far beyond accounting. William saw an unfinished responsibility that had followed him through every failed conversation and every public fracture. The sovereign grant decision mattered because it forced all three to confront something they had avoided for years. Separation had never truly ended the struggle over royal belonging. Meghan understood why the remaining connection mattered, even if it offered little direct financial value. She no longer carried out regular duties for the crown, yet any surviving administrative link still represented recognition that her years inside the institution had not been completely erased. William viewed the same link very differently. As the heir and one of the monarchy's most senior working figures, he believed blurred boundaries between private Sussex activity and crown-backed structures could become a problem for the next reign if they remained unresolved. Harry tried to stay calm when he spoke privately with Meghan after the notice arrived, but his frustration surfaced quickly. He could accept disagreement. What he could not accept was discovering that William had approved the final cutoff without giving him advance warning. Meghan listened as he struggled with the deeper insult he felt beneath the decision. To him, This was another moment when his brother had acted as future king before speaking his family. William faced a different kind of pressure. He reviewed the directive before it moved forward and stopped at the sentence containing the word permanent. He knew exactly how Harry would read it. He knew Meghan would see it as another door deliberately slammed shut. Still, he left the language untouched. In his mind, weakening the order simply to reduce immediate anger would leave the monarchy carrying the same uncertainty into the future. Catherine sensed the cost almost immediately. During a private conversation, she asked William whether he was prepared for what the decision could do to the family. The Princess of Wales understood that royal legitimacy was not only about titles. It was also about who could still point to official structures and claim some form of continuing institutional connection. The prince answered quietly that allowing ambiguity to survive would create worse consequences later. She pressed him once more, but he did not retreat. That was the real heart of the conflict. Meghan saw history being erased. Harry saw reconciliation becoming harder. William saw a precedent that could grow more dangerous with time. Yet his resolve had not begun with theory, policy, or distant concerns about the crown. One specific incident had changed everything. Months earlier, a routine request crossed William's desk. Attached to it was a detail that should not have been there at all. He read it twice, called for an explanation, and from that moment forward, temporary restrictions were no longer enough. What he discovered became the point of no return. The real beginning of the crisis was not the day Meghan received William's order. It came months earlier, when palace administrators forwarded an unusual request involving an old Sussex-linked royal account code that should have been practically dormant. Nothing dramatic happened publicly. No statement was issued. Yet inside William's office, one question suddenly took on enormous importance. Why was a channel associated with official royal expenditure still being referenced after the relationship it belonged to had effectively ended? William had already begun examining old royal privileges that had survived long after their original purpose faded. Dormant administrative permissions are simply old authorizations that can remain attached to former offices even when nobody actively uses them. And that made them dangerous in a system built on clear lines of authority. He wanted those gray areas identified before they became problems for a future reign. What appeared harmless on paper could still be interpreted outside palace walls as proof of official royal recognition. Then, the request arrived. William read it carefully and stopped at one line seeking confirmation that an old Sussex-associated sovereign grant reference could still be acknowledged for a proposed overseas engagement. He circled the reference number, set down his pen, and asked why it still existed. The answer did not satisfy him. The route carried little immediate financial value, but the future king understood something more important. Anyone seeing that reference could mistake it for continuing crown authorization. William ordered the matter examined more closely. A documented internal review traced the surviving connection and confirmed that it had remained largely because nobody had formally removed it. That explanation only hardened his position. He told a senior aide privately that partial restrictions were no longer enough. If palace staff could misunderstand the status, then outside advisors could misunderstand it too. And if outsiders misunderstood it, the Sussexes could eventually find themselves associated with an authority the crown no longer intended to provide. Harry reacted badly when he later discovered that his brother had personally challenged the request. He felt William was treating every surviving Sussex connection as though it carried suspicion. The prince saw the opposite. To him, Harry's anger proved how emotionally loaded these forgotten privileges had become. Something technically minor had acquired the power to suggest belonging, approval, and legitimacy all at once. Meghan eventually learned the same truth. This had never been an accidental administrative cleanup. William had seen the reference, questioned its existence, and decided the entire route needed to disappear permanently. Once she understood that, her anger changed. She no longer wanted an explanation from palace officials. She wanted one from William himself. And when Meghan finally confronted him, the argument stopped being about funding altogether. It became a battle over respect, authority, and who had the right to decide when a royal relationship was truly finished. When Meghan finally spoke to William about the order, neither side bothered pretending the conversation was only financial. She wanted to know why the restriction had been made permanent, why Harry had not been warned, and why an arrangement carrying little practical value required such dramatic finality. William's answer cut through every technical argument. The problem, he said, was not what the access had been used for. The problem was what people could still claim it represented. Meghan entered the conversation, determined not to let palace language soften what she believed had happened. William came prepared to defend an institutional boundary, meaning a clear line between private family activity and official royal authority. There were no cameras, no ceremony, and no public statement to hide behind. That mattered, because every word now carried personal weight. She saw humiliation dressed as governance. He saw unfinished business that had been left unresolved for too long. Meghan asked the question directly. Why forever? William paused, before answering that a royal privilege could not remain alive simply because formally ending it felt uncomfortable. She pushed back at once. To her, that argument sounded less like cleanup and more like punishment. Harry stepped in emotionally, telling his brother that every concession seemed to produce another closed door. William refused the accusation. He told him that leaving unclear privileges untouched would only create more confusion later. Then William said something neither of them expected. The permanent wording had been his decision. Officials had originally prepared language that allowed the matter to be reviewed again in the future, but he had instructed them to remove that clause. Harry stared at him, stunned by the certainty behind it. Meghan realized the deeper meaning almost immediately. This was not a cautious restriction imposed by nervous administrators. The prince had personally chosen finality. Meghan pressed him harder. She asked whether there was any higher conversation she could request, any senior intervention that could reopen the route. William did not offer false hope. He had taken ownership of the boundary, and ordinary palace administration could not simply reverse it. That answer landed harder than everything that came before. Harry heard rejection. Meghan heard authority. William heard responsibility. Yet one question remained larger than the argument itself. The heir could insist on permanent language, but a decision carrying this much family weight would never exist in isolation. Someone above the dispute had to decide whether to challenge him or allow the order to stand. The confrontation ended without reconciliation, but William did not leave exposed. Behind his decision stood a quieter judgment about the future of the monarchy, and that judgment led directly to King Charles. The most powerful response was not a speech, an argument, or another order. It was silence. King Charles was given the opportunity to question William's decision, and everyone around the issue understood what intervention would mean. A father could soften a conflict between his sons. A sovereign could insist on greater flexibility. Yet when the final papers were placed before him, Charles faced a painful reality. Reversing William might preserve temporary peace, while reopening the very ambiguity the monarchy was trying to eliminate. Charles understood that his position made every choice heavier. As reigning monarch, he carried the final authority of the crown, meaning his intervention could reshape how palace officials treated the entire matter. But this was not only about administration. William was taking greater responsibility for structures he would one day inherit, while Harry remained his younger son, still tied to years of family pain. If the king stepped in, he might ease one wound while weakening the boundary his heir believed was essential. Charles read the summary alone. and stopped when he reached the sentence confirming that the access had been permanently terminated. He removed his glasses, placed them beside the file, and stayed silent. The wording was cold, but the consequences were deeply personal. Harry would read it as another rejection. William would see any reversal as proof that difficult decisions could be undone whenever family pressure became intense. William later spoke to his father privately. He admitted that he took no satisfaction in making the cutoff final. Charles listened before answering that responsibility was rarely measured by whether a decision felt good. The king understood his son's point. Royal structures could not remain deliberately unclear simply because clarity carried emotional pain. William repeated that temporary language would only postpone the same conflict. Charles made his choice through restraint. He did not overturn the directive. He did not demand softer wording. He allowed William's permanent decision to stand. That silence changed the balance inside the family. Harry could no longer assume that his father would always step between him and his brother when an institutional dispute became too painful. William had drawn a boundary, and Charles had declined to erase it. For the first time, the younger son faced the possibility that future disagreements would not end with the king quietly reopening a door. Meghan soon understood the same thing. The word permanent was no longer just dramatic language inside one directive. It was about to become real through a series of practical changes she could not ignore. Charles had chosen restraint rather than rescue, leaving William's order untouched. And within hours, the machinery behind the decision began closing every remaining route connected to the old arrangement. The first consequence seemed almost insignificant. An outdated internal reference disappeared from a palace system. Then another confirmation arrived. Then another. Each change was small on its own, yet together they formed something unmistakable. William's directive had not been written for appearances. The machinery behind it was already moving. Meghan had expected a symbolic rebuke she could challenge publicly. Instead, she watched a series of quiet administrative actions make the separation increasingly impossible to reverse. Meghan soon understood why those small changes mattered. Palace offices began removing obsolete permissions, and Sussex linked references from official duty systems, closing routes that had survived long after their practical use had ended. These actions did not touch her personal wealth or ordinary private resources. Their importance was institutional. They ended the remaining signs that could suggest she still held administrative recognition inside structures reserved for official crown activity. Meghan received another confirmation and placed her phone on the table. She looked at Harry and said William was no longer sending a warning. He was rewriting what remained of their relationship with the institution. Harry heard the anger in her voice, but he also heard something else: certainty. Each deactivation made it harder to argue that the order was temporary, symbolic, or designed merely to intimidate them. Harry struggled with what to do next. His instinct was to challenge his brother publicly and force an explanation. Yet the Duke also understood the danger. A loud response could strengthen William's argument that private Sussex activity and crown-linked structures needed complete separation. He told Meghan that attacking the decision might satisfy them emotionally, while damaging their position strategically. She did not disagree, but neither could accept how quietly the doors were closing. Then another problem emerged. Advisors examining the directive found no automatic appeals route capable of restoring the access. Ordinary palace administrators could not simply reactivate what had been removed. Any reversal would require a conscious new royal decision. The discovery made the word permanent feel heavier than ever. William, meanwhile, refused to turn implementation into celebration. He instructed officials not to use triumphant language and not to present the changes as a victory over Meghan or Harry. The prince wanted finality, not spectacle. That restraint surprised the Sussexes because it denied them the public confrontation they had expected. Harry began to see the conflict differently. If his brother wanted humiliation, William had opportunities to make the cutoff louder. Instead, he was making it quieter. That distinction opened one final door. With the paperwork nearly settled and the public battle still waiting outside, Harry decided he needed an answer no advisor could provide. He asked William to meet him alone, not as heir and duke, not as rivals inside the monarchy, but simply as brothers. For once, there were no advisors, no formal statements, and no administrative language to hide behind. Harry and William faced each other with the sovereign grant decision already complete. Nothing said in that room could pretend the last several years had not happened. Harry wanted to know whether his brother had truly decided there was no road back. William gave an answer neither of them found comfortable. Family relationships could change, but royal privileges could not remain suspended forever, waiting for that change. Harry knew the meeting could no longer be used to bargain over paperwork. Implementation had already begun, and the institutional decision was effectively settled. What remained was something harder. The brothers had spent years allowing two separate questions to become tangled together: whether their relationship could ever recover, and whether old access connected to official royal structures should stay alive. William wanted those issues separated at last. The prince believed reconciliation could not depend on dormant privileges surviving in the background. Harry asked the question directly. Did William want him erased from royal life completely? His brother did not answer quickly. He said being family and holding access linked to the official monarchy were not the same thing. Harry pushed back. To him, the permanent language felt like rejection written into policy. William acknowledged that he knew the wording would hurt, but he refused to pretend uncertainty was kindness. William told him that meaningless privileges could become emotionally dangerous when people treated them as proof that nothing had truly changed. He argued that leaving them untouched created false expectations for everyone involved. Harry listened, still angry, but the argument was beginning to sound different. His brother was not claiming that the family relationship had to end. He was saying that institutional access could no longer be used as a substitute for one. Then William made the distinction unmistakable. The order would not be withdrawn. The financial and administrative boundary was final. But he did not consider their personal relationship permanently closed. Harry went quiet. That sentence changed the temperature of the entire conflict. He still hated the decision. He still believed his brother had gone too far. Yet for the first time, he understood what William believed he was doing. The institutional door had been closed, without declaring the family bond dead. Pain remained, but the argument itself had shifted. Neither brother walked away reconciled, but both left with one truth, finally separated from the other. Outside, that nuance was already disappearing. News of the permanent cutoff was moving beyond palace walls, and soon the world would reduce a private distinction into something far louder. Headlines, public judgment, and a debate over whether William had just shown Britain exactly what kind of future king he intended to become. By morning, a technical royal restriction had become a national argument about loyalty, power, money, and the future of the crown. Commentators treated William's decision as far more than administrative housekeeping. Supporters called it overdue clarity. Critics described it as unnecessarily absolute. Yet the image dominating the discussion was strikingly simple. Meghan outside the working royal structure, Harry caught between family and institution, and William emerging as the man increasingly willing to draw boundaries Charles once hesitated to make permanent. Meghan watched the coverage with growing frustration, because the story had already escaped the language of administration. The cutoff carried little immediate financial meaning, yet its symbolic value was enormous, because the sovereign grant remained associated with official royal duties and palace operations funded for the working monarchy. Broadcasters turned that distinction into a larger question: who still belonged to the crown in an institutional sense, and who had finally moved beyond it. Harry understood why the debate was spreading, but he also knew the family reality was far more complicated than the headlines suggested. Then one front page changed the tone completely. A fictional morning newspaper appeared with 4 enormous words across its cover: "The final royal link cut." Broadcasters repeated the phrase as crowds gathered near Buckingham Palace, debating whether William had now created the clearest separation since Harry and Meghan stepped away from frontline royal duties. Meghan hated the triumphal language. She told Harry that the public was being encouraged to see defeat where she saw a painful family fracture. William reacted differently, but no less strongly. He told an aide that institutional boundaries should never become public humiliation. The prince had wanted clarity, not celebration. Palace staff therefore kept their language deliberately restrained, stressing that official royal functions and private Sussex activity were being separated, rather than presenting Meghan as someone who had been conquered. Still, the argument kept growing. A royal commentator captured the tension in one sharp line during a televised discussion. William had not expelled Meghan from a family. He had removed ambiguity from an institution. Harry heard the distinction immediately because it echoed the private conversation he had just shared with his brother. Meghan heard something colder. To her, the sentence still confirmed that the institution had decided exactly where she stood. By evening, supporters praised William's firmness, while critics questioned whether permanence had been necessary. Yet the noise could not change the order, and it could not restore what had already disappeared. The headlines had turned private pain into public judgment. But once the cameras moved on, only 4 people were left carrying the real consequences: Meghan, Harry, William, and Charles. And when the noise finally faded, one question remained: what had this decision truly settled forever? In the end, nobody truly won. Meghan lost the final administrative connection she could point toward, as evidence that some institutional bridge remained. Harry discovered that his father's reign could no longer guarantee protection from William's harder boundaries. Charles accepted that preserving family peace could not always determine royal policy. And William crossed perhaps the most difficult threshold of all. He chose permanent clarity, knowing the decision would be interpreted by his own brother as something painfully close to rejection. Meghan read the final implementation confirmation and reacted differently than Harry expected. The sovereign grant, the public system supporting official royal duties and related palace operations, now stood completely outside her remaining connection to royal life. No hidden reversal followed. No temporary exemption appeared. She closed the message, looked at her husband, and said the argument over that particular link was finished. For the first time, she did not ask how it could be restored. Harry understood what that surrender meant. He still carried anger toward William, and the pain between the brothers had not disappeared. But fighting the order would only extend a battle he could no longer win through palace machinery. He began to accept that whatever relationship survived between them would have to exist as family, not through inherited privileges or administrative access. Meghan reached the same conclusion, even if acceptance came with humiliation. William did not celebrate. In a private conversation with Catherine, he admitted that permanence had been necessary because temporary arrangements had repeatedly reopened the same wound. The Princess of Wales understood the cost behind his words. She knew the decision strengthened institutional clarity. Yet she could also see that the prince had paid for it personally. He had drawn a cleaner line for the monarchy, while making reconciliation with Harry more emotionally difficult. Charles chose not to reopen the matter. The king understood that his silence now carried its own message. By allowing William's order to stand, he accepted that authority inside the family was shifting toward the future king, and that the next generation would not preserve every inherited ambiguity simply because removing it caused pain. The final meaning was impossible to escape. Meghan's institutional separation from the sovereign grant system was complete. Harry could no longer use his royal position as a bridge back to those privileges. William had established a harder principle. If reconciliation ever came, it would have to be personal, not financial or administrative. What began as one quiet directive ended as something far larger. The crown did not erase the family bond, but it finally separated that bond from royal entitlement. Meghan walked away without the access she once retained. Harry faced his brother without an institutional shield. Charles allowed the boundary to stand, and William accepted the personal cost of drawing it. The argument was over. The door was closed. The distinction was permanent. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.